Are cold emails and pitch slapping inboxes really driving enough revenue for you to hit your goals? Have you ever thought about how much faster deals would convert and move if you were starting out with warm introductions and trust instead of trying to cold email a bunch of people who have never heard of you before? I'm John Hill, aka Small Mountain, and in this previously recorded but newly released episode of the Founders Growth Show, I'm sitting down with David Connors, CEO and co-founder of The Swarm. He breaks down why warm intros convert 5 to 10 times better than cold outbound messaging, how to pivot your product using real customer feedback instead of getting trapped by the sunk cost fallacy, and the exact steps to turn your network into a predictable sales pipeline. If you were relying solely on high volume cold outreach, you risk losing goodwill, getting no responses, and exhausting your market. As a founder, you want to nurture relationships, not burn through them. David and I cover exactly how to do this. Let's hop in. Thanks for hopping on the show, man. I really appreciate you taking some time to come talk to us.
Thanks, John. Great to be here.
Awesome, man. So give us kind of the quick summation of what the Swarm is and how our people are using it.
Yeah, sure. The Swarm is a new software platform that we're building. It's helping sales teams to leverage their networks to drive more sales. So I think a lot of people acknowledge that the world of sales and how deals are done has changed a lot over the last few decades. And what we're hearing a lot from our customers is that the old playbook of spray and pray, cold outbound just isn't working as well as it used to. And the way that buyers now are evaluating and, how they want to buy has changed a lot, and just a lot more like how consumers want to buy, right? They ask their friends, they ask their network, and then as the seller, you are going to want to be leveraging the firm's relationships to make a more human, authentic relationship and connection with the buyer as they go through their journey. So there's a lot of different moving parts and elements to it. Happy to dig into it. But it's this new, I'd say, category that we're building. It's called go-to-network, which is replacing the old go-to-market paradigm.
And I think that was the line that really kind of stuck out to me whenever we first got connected, this idea of going to the network, because I kind of lucked into having a business partner who was a big networker. He just happened to know everybody in town. And so whenever we first started to work together, every coffee shop we sat in, he just knew everyone. And it was frustrating to me because I'm like, hey, I'm trying to get FaceTime with my new business partner. And there's a lot I need to learn, but he just knows everyone. And I was like, how do you know all these people? He's like, you're going to get there. And I was like, probably not, but then I just started to network and grew a fairly sizable local network. And then whenever I made the switch to really trying to develop a non-local presence, I had to kind of recreate it in a digital format and everything. And there was big differences between how I built my local network versus the best way for me to build my digital network, right? There was a lot to learn during that process, but now it's the fastest way for me as a consultant and a coach to test new ideas. I can just go directly to my network. I can go get qualified feedback whenever I'm working with a new client who's trying to figure out what their go-to-market strategy needs to look like, or their product market fit and everything. Because I am a networker and I tend to those relationships, I can go and I can ask them hey, what are your thoughts on this? What would you pay for this? What would make this a non-negotiable that you would have to have it in your tech stack or something else like that? It allows me to cut through so much of the noise and the things that kind of will hamstring people who are new to this stuff, right? Because if you take advice from everyone, you're not really making any forward advancement, right?
100%. Yeah. There's so many different ways that you can leverage your network in sales, right? It's your top of funnel, driving new meetings and getting that top of funnel pipeline, but all the way through to closing deals and to influencing deals through to close. And, whether that's larger enterprise sellers doing multi-threading with multiple stakeholders of the firm, or it's actually just, more local deals where you're understanding who are they going to for this, this sort of information in this reference, and kind of helping to influence the deals, the sort of buying committee that sits around that individual. There's a lot of this stuff that's just been happening kind of organically or offline, to your point. and we're trying to help folks just to reveal the relationships that they can tap into. But even ourselves, like we're still figuring out what is this playbook, because it hasn't been defined yet, and everyone's sort of scrambling to figure it out. But we
Yeah.
know that there's something here that's definitely working. That it's converting. Warm intros convert 5 to 10x better than a cold intro. You're gonna have see 3 to 5x higher win rates. So it really is the way of the future, we think. But
Hmm.
how it gets done and making sure that you're doing it in a very human, authentic way, that's the key. Because you can't just like take the old spray and pray playbook and apply it to your network. You're gonna, you're gonna just like erode your goodwill and just drive through all your relationships super quick. So you have to have this kind of long-term perspective. And I like the phrase building, playing long-term games with long-term people, right?
Yep.
And like all this stuff you're talking about of like building these relationships in a coffee shop, like that's awesome. Building deep, authentic relationships with people, not trying to have this transactional, just trying to close this deal that's one quarter,
Yeah.
which is what sales kind of has been, especially like B2B sales for the past like few years. And that's what the sort of predictable revenue
Hmm.
playbook, like, kind of push pretty hard. But now I think people are waking up to the fact that actually takes a little bit more effort, a little bit more time, but it's kind of more fun when you have that longer term perspective, and salespeople can move away from that transactional, just trying to squeeze the deal or trying to trick people almost into like taking a meeting by playing around with subject lines. And instead actually just being this more creative consultant that like you're helping to educate, you're helping to um, build trust at scale, really.
Yep.
And yeah, that's what I'm excited about, that kind of new world that's coming together.
Yeah. Like, I love that line, long-term games with long-term people, right? Because in the beginning, whenever I was first starting to network here locally, you know, I was working with a sales coach, right? And a lot of the stuff that I do now comes from working with that sales coach. And it was always very interesting because like I thought I was going to the sales coach so that way I could get a referral from anyone, that I could close any deal that came across the plate and stuff like that. And really what sales coaching did for me was like kind of give me some nuance to that idea, right? Because like
Mm.
if you have to be on guard all the time with everyone that you're dealing with and everything, that's a lot of work,
Right.
versus like having deep enough relationships that you're not scared of making a mess up. You're not scared of making an introduction that might be less than stellar, right? It might not be a quantified business opportunity right here, right now, and so uh, there's a lot of nuance to it, right? Because like certain people are like, well, I should be able to get a referral and an introduction from everyone. But then also like, I don't open my network up to everybody I meet in the first conversation. Like
Right.
I need to kind of make sure you're going to be around for a while because, some of these people are in one day and gone the next. But then also like, I really want to have a good sense of like who you help and, make sure that I don't need to go through it myself, but I need to like see that it's like an actually good product and service before I'm willing to start making introductions and opening you into my network and stuff.
Mhm.
So where did this come from? Were you guys like doing lots of networking? Were you just hearing about it from other people that, they spend time networking, but they're not really sure how to like quantify the ROI? Like, how did you get to the Swarm as a product today?
Yeah. So I actually sort of come from the cold outbound world, right?
Oh,
I
okay.
was, I guess I'm reformed from the spray and pray.
We all have to do some of that stuff. Like
Right.
I used to pitch slap people and then I realized like
Yeah,
if I don't like it whenever anyone else does this to me, how hypocritical am I just going around expecting that anyone else is going to be okay receiving it from me? You know,
that's
really
right. So
bothered me.
I've sort of seen the light. My last startup was an outbound recruiting automation company.
Okay.
So we would find and engage passive talent at scale on
Okay.
behalf of startups. Typically, the founders looking for software engineers, product managers, more technical folks. And this was a few years ago before any self-serve tools existed. So I was actually using outreach.io, the sales engagement platform, and sending these mass emails to pools of hundreds of candidates for every role. And almost doing this kind of headhunting at scale, but for these more junior roles that no one was touching. No one was doing this before. And interesting, we actually won an award at the Outreach conference for using the tool in a creative way. Um, and I kind of started on the growth side, helping these founders that were just friends of mine and going through 500 and Y Combinator and being like, how do we acquire our first 10 to 20 customers? I was helping them to set up these outbound stacks of, okay, you use Outreach and use LinkedIn to find them, and then use Rocket Reach or these different other tools to find the email addresses and push it all into Outreach sequence, and off you go. But then the feedback from the founders was actually, we just need to hire engineers to build the product in the first place before we can start selling it. So can we use this outbound growth tools and tactics on the recruiting side? And that's when the sort of light bulb went off. I was like, okay, yeah, this could definitely work. Turns out it did work. And this was before everyone's inboxes were filled with, spam on the recruiting side as well. And it was interesting for a lot of different firms. We were profitable from day one, started scaling it up, working with big companies like Simply Safe and Cameo and Pandora. And then we started working with some venture capital firms. So Sequoia Capital was our main partner, started working with more of their portfolio companies. And then we started chatting with their internal team. And Jamie Bott, the talent partner at the time, said, hey, we're thinking about building something internally, kind of like this, but we prefer for you guys just to come join and bring the tech in-house. And then we can roll it out to our portcos and, shortcut the time it takes. And we're like, that's an interesting opportunity to go and work at one of the best VCs in the world to kind of see how they think about things. And it was a cool opportunity. So I was then in-house there and helping their talent team to build products, got exposure to the other product team, the data science team, and kind of understood how Sequoia was leveraging their network and their relationships. And then really started seeing this trend of the best founders, the really A plus, star founders from companies like Airbnb and DoorDash and, Zoom and these amazing billion-dollar companies. They had this through line, this trend they all did, which was they were relentlessly leveraging their investors' networks and Sequoia's network in particular, not just for talent, but for customer intros, for investor intros, and all of these company building activities were done through warm intros that converted way higher than if they were going to do cold outbound. So I was like, wait a minute. Everything I do, as could be called into question. I thought cold outbound was the way to go. You could reach anybody. Turns out, as with all things, there's a place for everything, right? Cold outbound is great for some things, and warm intros are great for certain things. And you're not going to have relationships with everyone. So you can't, go to network necessarily with everyone. Mm-hmm. But what you can do is if you have a defined set of 1,000 target accounts, you can carve out the ones where you have warm relationships. So that's what we started doing. And then I hit the end of my vest with Sequoia and, shook off the golden handcuffs and was able to leave and go start the next company. And I loved that idea of allowing any company to leverage their network, not just, Sequoia, but allowing any company to have that ability to pull in all of your LinkedIn connections, your email calendar connections, score and rank all the relationships, because LinkedIn is great for an individual's network, but it's kind of built more as an audience gathering platform now, and you have followers. It's not a real representation of a relationship. It's a pretty weak signal. I'm not sure about you, but I've connected with thousands of people and I don't know 90% of them, right? So it's like, how do we carve out the signal from the noise of your LinkedIn connections? What we figured out is if you layer multiple data sources on top of each other, then you can start honing in on that signal. So yes, you connect to LinkedIn, but how about, have you swapped an email? Have you had a meeting with this person? Did you used to work together? How long did you work together? Was it for a month? Was it for 2 years? Was it in the same location, the same function? And was it a small company? Was it a big company? So all of these different inputs, you can actually start to coalesce and kind of figure out what are the real relationships that you can actually start digging into. Now, obviously, nothing's going to be as good as in the person's head, but you can
Sure.
have a pretty good guess at it, and then that the individual can then start adjusting it. So that's the kind of the background of how we started figuring out that this was possible, and then wanted to build a software platform that allowed any company to do this themselves. And whether you're a small company and just getting started, or if you're a large company with a big sales team, it's kind of relevant for everybody.
Yeah. It's interesting. Right before this call, I was doing a private call with one of my one-to-one clients, and we were talking about networking because they enjoy doing it. They're very active in the local chamber of commerce and
Mhm.
participate in leads groups and everything else like that. But they didn't have any strategy to it, right? So they would network with anyone, they would take every meeting in the networking capacity that they could, and it was cutting away from the time necessary to go do everything else that they needed to be doing, you
So,
know? And so I was kind of talking about some of the stuff that has been helpful to me of like, you can't network with everyone because you can't have a relationship with everyone, right? So being a little bit more strategic and thoughtful about who's most likely to get value from either introducing you, making connection to you, and different things like that, we really start to separate the great networking opportunities from the ones that are just like kind of time wasters, right? And meetings for the sake of having meetings and everything. Okay,
that's
so I
right.
want to dive into some of the stuff that you were talking about a second ago, right? Because I think it's a very cool product, and I love the idea of enabling everyone to be a networker without necessarily all the time that it takes to go be a networker, right? Because it does take up a lot of time if you're going to do it well. But that warm introduction, there, like I talk about this with people all the time, the conversation doesn't even really start until you actually have trust with this other person, right? Until you
Hmm.
can ask a question about, hey, is it, what's your biggest gap or challenge currently? Well, we don't have one. Okay. They don't trust you yet, which is why you're getting a fabricated response versus, getting a warm intro. Hey, you should meet with John. Okay, cool. Like, hey, what do you think your biggest challenge? Oh, well, we start from that place of trust, which means that
Hmm.
we can get deeper quicker, we can qualify easier, and also the deal has more speed going through the process because we're not having to earn the trust, we walked in the door with it,
Correct.
which I think a lot of people just like aren't thinking about when they're trying to think about how can we send 2,500 emails in one day, and how do we personalize this at scale. You probably don't, right? Because
Yep.
you've already kind of made the decisions that kind of preclude you from being able to do that. But
Yeah. I think that's a
I want
good
to
point. Like, not all meetings are made equal, you know?
Oh, yeah. I rail whenever, there's like a sales leader or a marketing leader who's like, hey, you always take the meeting. That's nonsense, right? There are some meetings that we have to say no to so that way we have the time necessary to do everything else that's part of the role. I would like to talk a little bit about some of the stuff you were talking about in your story, if we could, for just a second.
Mm.
You mentioned like you'd gone internal at Sequoia, and then you shook off the golden handcuffs and you left. Were you, was that always the plan? Or were you like, hey, I'm gonna go do this for a little while, whatever happens, happens? Did you feel just called and compelled to go back into the entrepreneurial like segment? Like, why not stay at Sequoia and just ride it out?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a great place to work. A lot of people do work there for decades,
Hmm.
10, 20, 30 years. For me, it was always going to be just a stop off along the founder
Okay.
journey, right? I wanted to go in there, kind of see how they viewed the world and understand what makes a really attractive startup, and then what are some of the lessons from these amazing founders that they've backed. What is the through line? Uh, why can they see the future and read the tea leaves so well that they can pick so many of these great companies that end up being these enduring, massive companies. But for me, like, I got my start actually in management consulting, which is a partnership model, and it's very similar to the VC model, which is also a partnership model. And that org structure comes with a bunch of bureaucracy. And for me, that kind of internal bureaucracy just wasn't really a good fit for me right now. Maybe later in my life, it'll be different. But I love being able to build and being in the trenches and not being kind of on the sidelines giving advice and watching other people build. That that for me right now is kind of where I love being able to to take something from 0 to 1 and actually be the one building versus giving advice or giving capital to enable other people to do it.
Interesting. So when you were working there, what do you think the biggest takeaway was about those businesses that do go on to like perform like crazy, right? The unicorns and stuff like that. Did you see any trends about how they run their business that maybe was new thinking to you from that you didn't have before?
There's a few interesting things they did. I like this one breakdown of founder archetypes, which they developed
Okay.
when I was there, which is that founders of high growth startups typically fall under three kind of main buckets. One is the dynamo, the Mark Zuckerberg college dropout, usually pretty technical. This is the Silicon Valley, tech
Poster
startup
child. Yeah.
archetype, right? That is on the cover of Forbes and of everyone, thinks is a tech genius. Second one is a change maker, which is someone coming usually from one industry to another. They are bringing unique insight or certain passion. Maybe they have a deep technical knowledge and understanding. They're a scientist. They're sort of bringing this domain expertise. And then the third one, which is the most successful consistently again and again, is the veteran. And this is someone who has either been an executive for a long time, has typically
Hmm.
10 plus years in the market, and has way higher success rates than the other two archetypes. So what we learned was that actually, for a lot of companies, you're going to be best off looking at these more mature founders in their 30s, even 40s. Eric Wan of Zoom is a good example of this. Worked at a big organization, has a bunch of domain expertise, massive network that he can lean on, and a lot of credibility for the problem he's solving, and comes at it with a very structured, rigorous, pragmatic approach, and just knocks down the obstacles one after the other.
Interesting.
So that, and then generally in VCs, the other sort of like heuristics that if they have started a company before that's been successful, they have had some sort of exit, repeat founder, things like that. But that also lends itself kind of into that veteran archetype.
Hmm.
So that was interesting for me, which was like, okay, that kind of removed the bias maybe I had towards, oh, maybe I'm 30 and I'm too old already because like I'm not a
Yeah.
college dropout. But actually, you see the most successful founders are, I think, around 42 is the average age. The most successful founders who have then created billion-dollar companies.
That's
Um,
interesting.
the other interesting thing for me is that what I learned from when I was at Sequoia was that the best firms have this access that is half the game. Just getting access to the deals and getting the visibility into these interesting deals is often the biggest challenge for a lot of firms. Now, Sequoia didn't have that issue, right? Everyone would
Yeah.
love to talk with Sequoia, even just to kind of understand how they thought about things. So there's a lot of like incumbent kind of advantages that come with that. It's the same with a lot of the Sand Hill Road firms. But they're constantly trying to reinvent and disrupt themselves, which I loved seeing when I was there. They made huge investments, millions and millions of dollars in trying to transform themselves from a law firm to a technology firm, as they said,
Interesting.
building
Okay.
products, really having a data-driven approach. And that was part of why they acquired Automately, my last company, was to bring this more automation, more technology,
Okay.
more product into the firm, and to help to scale up and help to increase the leverage and the productivity of the whole firm, which was cool to see. They partners could have actually just taken that money and put it in their pockets, but instead they reinvested it into the
Yeah.
company, into building the next generation for the firm. So I think they're going to continue to do well. They're doing all the right things. They have a great leadership in firm. And yeah, it was a really interesting experience working there for sure.
So I'm curious because you mentioned that that you kind of came from like the cold outbound world, right?
Mhm.
Which, is a common business model. There's lots of people in the lead gen space, right? Arguably too many at this day,
Mhm.
at this day and age. How do you run your business differently now that you're building, like SaaS platform, social media platform, however you want to call that, versus running like a lead generating agency? Like, what's different for you this time?
Firstly, understanding the stage and the maturity of the company is so important in the efficacy of the cold outbound campaigns. I think before it was like you know, I had a hammer and everything looked like a nail,
Okay.
where I was just setting up the same machine that would send out these mass outbound campaigns, regardless of your product, of your brand, of your customer, you know. And I think I've learned now that those things are really important, right? And then if you're just getting started, you've got under 10 customers, you really shouldn't even touch cold outbound. You should be really leaning on your network to get warm intros to prospective customers from your team, your investors, your advisors, your partners. And then when you have a few happy customers, from your customers themselves and getting referrals. And that will actually get you all the way up to 50 to 100 paid customers without doing any cold outbound. And
Hmm.
that's going to be where, as a founder, as a sales team, you should be spending 80% of your time is on trying to generate those warm intros because they're going to convert, as we said before, a lot better. You're going to also have better retention and you're going to have happier, better customers
Yeah.
versus the ones that you will find if you do cold outbound. Now, at a
Hmm.
certain point, certain maturity, it then makes a lot of sense to then start layering in cold outbound. But again, you should test these different channels, and not every company is going to be a good fit for cold outbound. I think having the understanding now, some
Hmm.
warm outbound, some cold outbound, some is going to be paid social, some is going to be pure content. There's
Yeah.
organic stuff. There's all kinds of different channels, and you should be running experiments, kind of with each of them to then understand for your maturity, for your ICP, where you're at, what's going to be the best channel product, channel market fit for where you're at. And I think having that understanding is just makes the whole game a lot more simple and kind of easy to understand versus when all you've got is cold outbound and that's all you can do is like adjust your subject lines and
Yeah.
trying to adjust the ICP fit and who you're talking to and then trying to layer in more of this signal based selling to get intense signals either from first party website visits or product usage or third party signals. it's I think it can be very obviously it's very complex and there's dozens
Hmm.
of different tools that you could be stacking on top of each other. But it can also be pretty overwhelming for folks who are trying to make all these adjustments and all they get is like a 0.1% change in their, in their
Yeah.
rates to meetings. So it's sort of like just taking a step back and looking at the whole machine, all the different channels that you have available to you and understanding that at each point in time, you probably shouldn't be doing all of them. You should really just be focusing on one, find one
Yep.
that works for one customer, for one workflow, and then kind of stack it up from there. And that is
Man.
going to lead to a lot more success.
One of my favorite lines about being an entrepreneur and being a founder myself is that founder's vision is always a little bit dirty, right? And it
Mm,
kind of speaks to this idea that because, like I know my stuff so well, I know endlessly how it could apply to different situations, but that's not the same thing as like the marketing message and the audience that it's for.
right.
And, you're talking about, testing different headlines to have like a 1% increase. Let's talk about all the people that are trying to do these cold email campaigns without testing through their network, through people
Hmm.
who are willing to kind of tell them where this thing sucks
Right.
and how to improve it. And, getting all of that really great feedback from people you actually have relationships with. And I know so many people that would rather just go hire a cold email thing for, honestly, because they're trying to hide a little bit, you know, and then those are huge misses. Like,
Hmm.
because there's lots of email campaigns that never get a positive response and never book a meeting and stuff like that. And that might mean that your messaging is garbage. It might mean that you're in the wrong market. It might mean that your value, USP is not clear enough or clean enough. But like, if you don't start from a place of at least like getting some users who are going to give you the benefit of the doubt or the feedback, the whole thing is so much harder, right? And that's one of the things that I was like
Yep.
trying to help people with. Like, you can't, in my opinion, have a good shot at success if you're starting from a marketing led kind of situation, because you might win some deals, but those are going to be like kind of like high stake deals, right? They're going to leave if you don't meet expectations. They're not going to hang around and tell you what they didn't like and give you an opportunity to improve it. So then all that churn is for no great reason whatsoever.
Yeah. One playbook I like here is as you're building the product, try and develop a customer advisory board that is your
Mm,
design partners who are giving you feedback, even on the Figma mock-ups that you're putting together and saying, if we went and built this, like, would this be valuable?
yes. Hmm.
Read the mum test, by the way, which I got to read again. It's such a good book. But how to do
The
the
mom test?
MOM test, yeah, it's fantastic. How to do some
Oh,
discovery sessions without leading the interviewee and
oh, okay.
without introducing your own biases in there. Typically, it's basically you're not even showing them anything, not even giving any solutions. It's more just asking about how they're solving it today, what's the pain points that they're feeling, really understanding where the emotion is, things that
Hmm.
people get frustrated or angry with, and like dig into that. And then you're kind of, at maybe the last 5 minutes of call, showing your mock-ups and things like that. But once you have that customer advisory board, and maybe, by the way, you can incentivize them with some fractional advisory shares, give them 5, 10,000 shares that vest over a couple of years, and they're bought into what you're doing, right? You've spent a few hours by that point, and then by the time you have something that's available for purchase, guess who's going to be your first customers, right? And
Absolutely.
then as you're kind of building this alongside your design partners and your customer advisory board, they hopefully you're doing something that is exciting for them and they're kind of your early adopters. They're going to know 10 other people like them, right? And that's
Hmm.
kind of where, again, you can build the trust and then expand out from there. And I've seen that model work really well. Obviously, it's hard for B2C customers,
Yeah.
companies and products to do that. But I think there's still value in having that voice of the customer represented whenever you're building products and especially as you start to commercialize it. And I love
I
that, like talking to your customers, just literally copying and pasting their words and then putting it on your website.
Yeah. Like it sometimes it astounds my clients because like I'll come into a project where like I'm working with a sales team or helping them improve messaging or positioning and stuff. And my first ask is like, okay, I want to talk to your favorite customer, and they're like, you're a sales guy. Why do you want to talk to the customers? And it's like, we're looking for more people like them. Right.
Mhm.
So putting me in close proximity without that bad conduit of the founder or the leader or the marketer or the salesperson is going to lead to a cleaner conversation and better, like, I guess, grasp on the value for them.
Yeah.
Um, so, okay, going back a little bit, right?
Mhm.
What was the first thing you founded?
Like when I was a kid.
Yeah, like, I mean, if it goes back that far, like, what was your first entrepreneurial venture?
Yeah, the first one was a stationary lending business when I was
Stationary lending?
yeah, when I was 6.
Okay.
I was I was like, a little bit type A when I was a kid. I had my
Okay.
pencil case, was very nicely organized, nice sharpened pencils and, I had my glue stick and my eraser. And I found people just kept borrowing stuff from me, and then every now and then they'd like, lose it or like it get damaged. And I was like, all right, that's it. Like, I'm gonna start charging people because like this is happening like every lesson. I was like
Interesting.
5 cents for one lesson, and you can borrow whatever you want. Yeah, that cut out a few of the customers, but ICP, and that was a couple of kids who were consistently forgetting their stuff and had some pocket money and ended up, getting 20 cents here, 50 cents there. Ended up making about $130. That was just on this like loose change that
I
my
love that.
teacher found out about and then confiscated because didn't think it was a good idea, but then spent the money on a party for the whole class, which had a lot of pizza and unlimited soda for everybody. So uh, turned out pretty well.
So after that, what was the first business to where like you did paperwork and you were actually growing it?
Yeah, so it's one in university, which was vending machines. A
Oh,
buddy
okay.
of mine and I, we got a couple of, well, we started with one vending machine that was in his dad's auto repair shop, basically
Okay.
a Toyota dealership. And, $1 for Coke and a bag of chips, and that was it. Like, stocked the machines ourselves and then eventually hired someone else to do it. And man, those things print money. Um, and it's just like, yeah, every week it was just getting emptied, and then we just come in and
Really? Huh.
yeah, like I think it was like $400 or $500 a week. That was just pure profit, like once you take out
That's
the
not bad,
cost of
right?
things. So we then got another one. I think machines cost like 8 grand or something like that.
Okay.
But and once you get into this business, you realize that there are some big players who like own thousands in these like fleets of these different machines. So eventually, someone got wind of what we were doing and made us an offer, and we sold that
That
to them.
is
But
fascinating.
yeah,
It's interesting because like I meet so many founders they're starting online, and I
totally.
think it's cool that, your background like comes from very old school, not online business, right? Like, renting pencils and paper to people, but then also the vending machine thing. Like, how do you think starting offline in a very kind of like old school fashion helps you today?
Yeah, I mean, online wasn't an option when I was a kid.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
same.
could have been different. But yeah, I remember when we first got the internet and it came on a CD-ROM, and there was the screeching noise of connecting
Hmm.
to the dial-up internet, making sure your mum didn't pick up the phone when you were trying to surf
Yep.
the web and all that fun stuff. But I think today, if you're a digital native, you're kind of growing up, born on the web. I think it is a different situation where like these relationships that you're building with your customers are at arm's length, right? You're not in the same room. You're not looking at them in the eye. You're not kind of deeply understanding necessarily what they want and need. And I think it's the classic kind of engineer's mistake of like jumping into solutioning and building something and then kind of turning around and being like, ta-da, here's what I built.
Hmm.
Does anyone want it? Like, actually, we don't really want that. And then you have to constantly be doing these revisions.
Yeah.
So I think it comes back again to that customer discovery and the design partners are kind of really sitting down in person, if you can, with your customers and who you're trying to sell to, and then designing the product, around them and around their needs. And
Okay.
it's going to just sort of save you so much time in this product development of having to do all these iterations based on the feedback from what you've already built. And obviously there's the sunk cost fallacy, which is really hard to overcome. But once you build
Yeah.
something, it's really hard to throw it all away and then start something brand new. I've definitely fallen into that trap before as well, where we started the Swarm focused on recruiting, and that was my background, and I was like, this is going to be the quick win. We'll be able to solve the recruiting referrals use case, and then kind of expand out into other use cases like sales and fundraising, which we've done. And then the whole recruiting market totally flipped. Started 22, and everyone was doing layoffs, and no one needed a recruiting product anymore. But it took us a good chunk of time and a bit of burn before we figured that out. And we were like, actually, we've got to just stop anything related to recruiting, just fully pivot into sales. As soon as we did that, we've seen a lot more success. But
That's interesting.
it's a hard lesson that I think you've got to learn. Hopefully only once, but I think I found that you kind of fall into the trap of once you build something, it's really hard just to let it go and move on from
Absolutely. Yeah, like I read about sunk cost bias a lot because, as a sales guy, status quo thinking, and all that other stuff.
there.
So thinking about y'all's pivot, right? I would love to zero in on this. How are you holding that as you're going through that struggle and seeing all the writing on the wall?
Yeah, we were definitely trying to stay as close to our customers and just not be so attached to the product. I think the really big benefit for us was our customers at this stage were early stage founders, and they
Okay.
had different needs that were very easily like translatable, or ability for us to switch from recruiting to sales was, thankfully for us on the product side, pretty straightforward, where the mechanism of like mapping and importing networks of ranking and scoring relationships, searching through those relationships, and then sort of sending out intro requests, that flow is basically the same across
Okay.
recruiting and sales and fundraising. It was just like the data that we had. We just needed to add more company data and things like that. The like overwhelming feedback and response from our customers was, hey, this recruiting tool thing is cool, but we're just not hiring. So like, we're not going to pay for it, but we need customers and we need revenue. So like, if you can help us with that, can we use this platform for finding more metros? Then we'll pay for that. And we said, okay, we can do that. There's a few things we need to do. Let us go and build it. 3 months later, we relaunched it, and we've been off and running since.
I want to dig into that a little bit more, just if possible, right? Because, was it that clear? Were they coming and saying like, hey, this is super solid, but we're not hiring, but we would use it in this fashion. Can you make this like was it that clean, that much on the nose? Or were you having to do like discovery of like, okay, like what would be helpful?
There was a bit of both. From the founders themselves, they would tell us directly because they had both hats. But if
Okay.
it was like the head of recruiting or head of talent, they were just saying, we can't
Okay.
drop this right now. We're not adding any new tools. We're doing layoffs. Like that's it. So then it was on us to be like, okay, we're hearing this sales could be interesting. Now we have to go find this new set of design partners who are salespeople and do more discovery with them, understand their workflows, where this fits in, and actually validate that hypothesis that this would be valuable for them. And then, went off and did that. And then came back, ran the experiments, gathered the data, came back positive. Okay, now let's now double down in this direction.
When you're going through that, I would like to kind of talk about your mindset for a moment, right? Because we're talking about sunk cost bias, and we've kind of been talking around the idea it's very easy to get fixated on like what you think is going to be helpful as opposed to going and collecting that feedback.
Right.
Are you struggling like mentally as you're kind of going through this thing, right? Because, you come from this lane, you got deep experience and stuff, right? Like, is your mindset of like, God, like, I just really wish this would work? Or is it like, let's go find the path of least resistance? Like, how are you holding that in your head as you're kind of going through that? Because I think lots of people struggle with taking that kind of feedback that allows them to get to a clean pivot, right? They don't want to hear it. They kind of, push it off to the side and stuff. Did you struggle with anything like that during your pivot?
If you can set that up in your company values and principles where the voice of the customer really sets the North Star and the direction, it makes it a lot easier for everyone just to get aligned on that. Thankfully, we had an engineering team that was really great at this. A lot of them were ex-Uber and have worked on a bunch of different products and sort of had this startup mindset where they understood that making a pivot wasn't the end of the world. It didn't mean that you had failed. It just meant you were learning more and you were course correcting, to what the market is pulling you in and what the market is demanding, right? And I think there's this disconnect that sometimes happens with the founder's vision of like, this is what I think should exist in the world. And then where the rubber hits the road, where the market is actually telling you, we don't want that, we don't need that, it's too early for that, whatever it is. But here's the problem that we need help solving and we are willing to pay for it. And if you can kind of then reconcile that with the vision and then say, okay, maybe this is where we start. This doesn't have to be the entire encompassing vision of where this could be, but we start here and then we can expand out and we can do all these other interesting things. But we've got to solve this one actual tangible pain point and problem for this one customer right now that they're experiencing. That's like a hair on fire problem, not just some nice to have that they're going to switch off over a month or two. It's going to be like a critical painkiller, not a vitamin. And that, I think that just makes it more helpful for the whole team, just then to get alignment on it and just to be like, okay, we have heard pretty loud and clear by this point, this is what we need to do. And then let's, make the decision. Everyone gets on board, rally the troops, and, kind of off we go.
And I love that it goes back to your core values, right? Like how involved is the customer in the product that you're building when you're working through that with people? Because, if you don't come from sales, you don't know how to do a consultative sale, you don't know how to do discovery, you don't know how to like probe for market feedback or anything else like that. And then, standard sales stuff is try hard, try a lot, keep pushing, don't take no for an answer and everything else like that. For people who don't come from sales that might want to start a startup and stuff like this, how would you advise them of kind of threading that needle of you're going to have to do some volume because sample size matters in sales, but you should also be willing to adapt and adjust. Like, how do you separate that so that way people are moving forward with good intention and not getting stuck, either like burning down things too early or holding on to things way too long?
Yeah, I think the great forcing function for a lot of this is revenue, right?
Okay.
Where if you're getting a bunch of free trials and free pilots, booked and the customers are like, oh yeah, we'll try it. It's free. Like, there's no cost. then you're only going to learn so much. I think you really need to start charging as early as possible. And ideally, I think what I'm seeing a lot of successful startups do to start with is almost, it looks like a consulting engagement where they've got this managed services that is wrapped around the product that they're building. So they're helping to control the outcomes for the customer, which is really key and important. So the customer is delighted and happy because their outcomes are actually getting influenced. And then through that engagement, you're basically doing customer discovery because you're running it yourself and you deeply understand then what product you need to build because you've then been doing it and you understand it. So that's a really great model. But that way you get paid, you get money upfront. You can actually run this without any external funding. You can actually just run it, as a bootstrapped company and generate enough revenue as you go to then invest back in the product, or maybe just raise a small amount of funding versus the traditional VC playbook of having to raise a huge round
Yeah.
before you can build anything that's valuable. So we've actually started doing more of that ourselves, kind of having this managed service wraparound for the
Okay.
software, dog fooding our own product and kind of, we learn a lot, our team learns a lot. And I think just, again, shortens those feedback loops, which is hugely valuable.
I love the nugget in there that I think some people would miss, because there's, this gets talked about a lot, right? I think I think if you're hanging around entrepreneurs and founders and stuff like that, but it's like, you don't really know how much anyone values your product until you decide to charge for it,
Mhm.
And in this day and age to where like you can get a free trial of pretty much any tech on the planet, the idea that like revenue in choosing to charge, making that decision is going to run some people away, but they weren't your clients anyway. They weren't your customers, right? Because they left the minute you brought in a dollar sign,
Mhm.
But that's also kind of a fearful moment. I would assume for lots of founders of like, oh my God, we're going to scare off everyone, and then
Yeah.
we can't grow this thing. How do
Yeah. You might
people?
screw up 95% of your user base, right?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
that's really scary. But then you have the 5% who actually love what you're doing. And, the Kevin Kelly, like 1,000 true fans concept, or in these
yep,
days, if it's a
absolutely,
B2B company, maybe you only need 10 true fans. But just having people who love the product versus people who kind of just like the product, you will take 10x the less, people who love your product versus people who like it. And that's
yeah,
just going to set you up for a lot more success. But it is definitely scary. And I think the good thing is these days you can find a hybrid with like some freemium offering where
hmm
you can allow people to experience something, for free in the product and get a taste for it. But that's kind of more part of the growth strategy and the sort
yeah,
of product led motion, which is fantastic. And I think I love that approach as well versus gating all of the product value behind the sales gatekeeper. Instead, letting people experience and find a little bit of value and kind of de-risk, the
yeah.
product themselves. And it makes the whole thing a lot more scalable and efficient from your sales efforts as well.
That is really interesting. Yeah, because like everyone always talked about it with like pretty much everything else that I've ever looked at as far as like entrepreneurial stuff. Like you don't really know until you charge for it. But I never really thought about how that impacts growing, a SaaS company, right? Or, a product in the B2B space. But if it's free, everyone will at least be on board. But when you start charging, that's when you really find out who's really with you. That's
Yep.
phenomenal, man. That I'm going to have to sit and think on that for a while. Um, so changing gears a little bit,
Mhm.
what is your superpower when it comes to being a founder? What makes David a unique founder, really good at what he does? What's your superpower?
I love the image of building a machine and then getting the people to run it. That's what I like sort of always sort of fall back to thinking about the whole company as a machine and then how can we get the best people possible to run it that are needed, at that point in time. So for me it's really delegating as much as I can and kind of hiring the best people as I can and kind of getting out of their way, being a
Hmm.
chief, unblocker officer and sort of parachuting in wherever I can to help people get unstuck and unblock them, but really just giving them what they need and kind of getting the hell out of their way. I think so many founders I see fall into this micromanagement trap where they're just trying to do the job of the person they just hired,
Yeah.
and they're just getting in the way, you know? And
Yeah.
they're burning themselves out at the same time because they are trying to do the job of 6 different people rather than actually trusting the people that they've hired to do it. So if you don't trust the people you've hired to do the job, whether it's product or sales or marketing, whatever it is, then you shouldn't hire them in the first place, you know?
Agreed.
So that's my kind of MO as a founder.
Okay.
And yeah,
What is the worst advice you've gotten as a founder?
I think the growth at all costs VC era, and when I first started this company, it was late 21. We're in the height of the hype cycle and the boom, and it was raise as much money as you can at as a high valuation as you can. You know,
Okay.
I think I've come to appreciate now the downsides of that. And there's a great Silicon Valley episode. I'm not sure if you've seen, but the guy is like, I didn't know you could raise less money. It's like, no one ever told me. Um, and it just sets you up for so many great benefits. It makes you stay efficient and hungry and lean. It
Mhm.
keeps your valuation at a respectable rate that then the next round is a lot easier.
Yeah.
And then there's obviously less dilution. So then it means you don't have to um, have as big of an exit to have a meaningful outcome for the founding team, well, obviously the founders and the early employees. So I think, that's probably one learning is like I'd probably
Yeah.
maybe try and sort of do it with a little bit of a smaller raise to begin with. Um, and then next time I think I'll probably do that. Especially now you can get so much more done with all the generative AI tools for
Yeah.
design and product and kind of getting into those feedback loops with the customers. I think you could get some MVPs out the door pretty quickly these days.
Hmm. Okay. What's the best piece of advice or mentorship you've gotten on your path as a founder?
It would probably have to come back to the relationships and the networks that you build.
Really? Okay.
I think for me, like there's just so many compounding benefits to uh, knowing your strongest relationships and kind of investing and nurturing in them and just being really intentional kind of about doing that. Whether it's your own personal CRM or just a spreadsheet or calendar reminders, just to check in with people to offer value. Um, that I've just seen kind of again and again come out of the most like random places. But these, people that you've been helping for months and years can really support you throughout, your whole life's journey, whether it's finding a job or starting a company or fundraising or whatever it is. Um, and I think that's, at the end of the day, when you kind of look back on your, on your deathbed, having meaningful relationships is
Hmm.
such a huge part of just being human. And yeah, always constantly trying to do a better job of connecting and reconnecting and nurturing those relationships with the people that are closest to me.
I love that. I think for a long time I networked from like I thought I was giving back and providing value and stuff, but like looking back on it, like I was hungry for revenue, I'm hungry for opportunities and stuff like that versus now I'm in a place to where, I try to have time on the calendar just to meet with people who are struggling and are stuck, whether it seems like they're gonna like, need my help past that call or not, right? Really, really trying to give back, in a big way.
And just quickly, well, I'll just jump in there. Just like one
Yeah,
tactical
please.
thing you can do that I've
Yeah.
found
I
is
love
probably one of
tactics.
the most significant like value adds that I add to my network is whenever anyone is job hunting, try and just take like an hour out of your week and just sit down with them and like kind of go into detail of like what they're looking for
Mhm.
and like help them to firstly like just crystallize like if they're like a salesperson, most of the time they're not a salesperson, it's going to help them get into that mind like what's their ICP like for target accounts, like what are the
Yeah.
companies they actually want to work for that are interesting. And most of the time they've just like sprayed and prayed job applications and like
Yep.
they'll happenstance they'll like end up somewhere else. But like just taking the time to have a bit more of a structured process, firstly, like it doesn't take long, 15, 20 minutes. And then open up your network and like kind of systematically go through, whether it's using LinkedIn or Swarm or something, just look through your relationships where you know people at those companies, and especially if you know recruiters or other people, and then offer to make intros I ask
Yeah.
them to usually send me a forwardable note that's like, intro to this person, and they have a bit more about themselves, like their CV or LinkedIn. I then forward along with my endorsement, and I can do 10 to 15 of these for this person. They're going to
Pretty
have
quickly.
a bunch of amazing conversations. Sometimes they'll land a job from it, sometimes they won't, but
Yeah.
they will appreciate that you have really gone out of the way, because not many people will do that. It doesn't
Absolutely.
take you long, it's an hour, but it's, a lot of benefit, and it really helps that person out. So I try to do that as much as I can.
Yeah, I love that, right? Like one of the, a couple of tactics that have helped me is like I back in the day whenever I was trying to grow my local network, I had a KPI that I wasn't allowed to leave work on Friday until I'd made at least 3 introductions in my network, right? And
Nice.
it was a standardized thing. I'm not leaving the office on Friday. And like some weeks it was like, man, I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel. Like, you're cool, you're cool. You both like red t-shirts. You guys should go hang out and like have a beer and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But building that effort, and extending that effort, for a long time, I just thought I was checking a box for myself. And then I met them, they were brand new, and I made some introductions for them, and then I didn't see them for months. And then whenever we caught back up, they're like, those 3 introductions that you made for me completely changed my business. And
Yeah.
like until that moment, I never realized the value of that these connections were getting for other people, right? It
Mhm.
really kind of cemented it for me at a much deeper level that like, hey, this is helpful in value, just being able to kind of open the doors for other people. And
Yeah. Absolutely. You can change someone's life with one introduction.
one could not agree more. Like,
Mhm.
and I think people who are like, I'm too busy to network and stuff like this, like they're doing themselves such a grand disservice, right? Like they're limiting their ability to like control their own destiny, right? In a lot of situations. And
Yeah.
I get that people are busy. I get that people are introverts. I'm an introvert, but I still network a lot because like I just know the benefit of it. One thing that I've started to do, and this has been super helpful on the business networking side, is like, hey, I would love to refer people over to you. Man, John, just send them over. Okay, well, hey, I would like a little bit of more specific information about what a really great fit for you looks like, because I don't want to send over a bunch of people that are bad fits, time wasters, tire kickers, and stuff like that. Could
Yeah.
we have a quick conversation about what are they dealing with? What are they struggling with? What are they talking about? So that way I can make sure that if I come across someone for you, it's not a complete waste of time. And that's super helpful for getting people to like see that I really care about making a good introduction,
Mm.
right? And then some people will return the favor. Okay, John, like, whoa, I really appreciate this. Like, what are you looking for? And then I'm always like, I'm happy to talk to anybody, right? Because like as a sales guy, my job is to be able to qualify with intention and stuff like that. So, but really calling out, like, I don't just want to send you a bunch of wasted, effort and everything else like that. Can we get clear on it? When when you're thinking about who is going to get the most value out of the swarm, right? Let's say someone hits the site today, they load in all their contacts, they make all the connections. Who is going to have like a crazy moment using the swarm?
We see that magic aha moment when multiple networks are combined. And typically it's
Oh,
actually an external network that
okay.
gets added, that they suddenly reveal all these connections that they didn't have access to before. So
Okay.
it could be a founder that's adding their investors' networks for the first time. It could be a salesperson finding their senior execs networks and kind of looking through those for the first time. Like, hey, wait a minute, our CMO used to work at Adobe, and we've been trying to talk to them. But like they've got lots of people in the network that they can make an intro to, and they
Hmm.
just never got around to talking to the CMO about it. All of these invisible relationships that just get revealed. I think that's the power of the platform, is combining all of these networks together. Um, if it's an individual looking through their own network that's like a personal CRM use case, it's still somewhat interesting to see like your LinkedIn plus your email calendar kind of combined for the first time. But really, that power of combining multiple networks to form this swarm,
Hmm.
collective network of the whole company, is where you're going to really see the magic, which is what I love to see.
Interesting. All right. I love that answer. And okay, so David, thank you very much for coming on the show, talking about the swarm, just sharing some of your background. If someone wants to find out more about the swarm, where should they go?
I'd say the best place is probably LinkedIn. My personal page, I try and share a lot of stories and anecdotes of how we're helping customers and so my musings on the industry and kind of where it's heading. And then the Swarm page itself, we'll share more product updates and stuff like that.
Awesome. All right. Well, David, thank you so much for hopping on the call. I really appreciate this, and I hope some people come check out the Swarm. Sounds like it's really a cool product.
Thanks again, John. Appreciate it.
All right. Cheers.